Welcome to LR Reports. This channel focuses on institutional research that I've personally reviewed. As a fund manager and family office analyst, my role is to filter through a large volume of research and focus only on what truly matters. AI helps structure and deliver the content efficiently, but the selection and interpretation are human.
Welcome back. For today's briefing, we're examining a deep dive research report from Bank of America's Global Research Team.
Published January 12th, 2026.
That's right. The theme is the rediscovery of nuclear energy, really driven by this massive surge in projected electricity demand. Think AI, data centers, general electrification.
Right. And just to be clear, our goal here isn't to just summarize the findings.
No, not at all. We're here to deconstruct the analytical structure itself. We're focused on the core logic, the assumptions, and most importantly, the key investment sensitivities.
And the analyst frames the core problem really well right up front. You have this projection of 7,000 additional terawatt hours of electricity needed globally by 2030?
It's a huge number. And the question becomes, how do you stabilize the grid while adding that kind of capacity?
Exactly. And their answer is nuclear. Projecting this 55% capacity expansion by 2040.
They make a pretty compelling initial case for it, too, starting with the capacity factor differential.
It's a powerful number. Nuclear at 93% reliability.
I mean, that just dwarfs everything else. Natural gas is down at 57%, wind at 35%.
And solar is even lower, around 25%. So it immediately addresses that core intermittency problem you see with other clean sources.
It does. That reliability is, it's table stakes for any serious discussion about baseload power.
Okay, but here's where I see the first major opportunity to strengthen the report.
Go on.
The competitive framing of nuclear's advantage, it needs to be radically sharpened.
Sharpened how?
By pivoting away from just reliability, which is, let's be honest, a known variable at this point.
And toward what?
Toward the superior economic and, maybe more importantly, the geopolitical resilience of its entire supply chain.
I see what you're getting at. There's a structural weakness there. By leading so heavily on capacity factor, the analysis kind of risks rehashing a decades-old debate, right? Reliability versus cost.
Exactly. But the analyst does have the data to make this new case. It's just buried.
You're talking about the life cycle costs and the material intensity figures.
They bury the most actionable data. I mean, the weakness here is that the most compelling insight is hidden halfway through the report.
The numbers on material use are pretty staggering.
Staggering is the word. Generating 1 terawatt hour of electricity requires over 16,000 tons of material for solar. For nuclear, it's about 900.
That's a 17-fold difference.
It is. And by not leading with that, they treat nuclear as just another power source instead of what it is, a strategic, sort of anti-fragile infrastructure asset.
So the suggestion here is to, weaponize that life cycle and material scarcity data right from the opening?
Yes.
Okay, but wait. If we pivot the entire thesis to material scarcity, are we kind of ignoring the elephant in the room? The cost of capital and the permitting hurdles are still the biggest blockers for nuclear, regardless of how much copper or polysilicon solar uses.
That's a fair challenge. The suggestion isn't to ignore permitting, not at all. It's to change the value proposition.
Frame it differently.
Explicitly pivot the thesis. Frame the nuclear trade not just as a bet on stability, but as a hedge against the exact things you just mentioned. The raw material scarcity, the volatile capex cycles, and the geopolitical choke points that plague utility-scale renewables and battery storage.
So you're modeling a long-term economic superiority, not just a short-term efficiency metric.
You are.
So how do you make that argument pop right away? What's a concrete example?
Okay, instead of just listing the capacity factor on page 1, you dedicate the introduction to comparing the energy return on investment, the EROI.
Energy gained versus energy invested.
Right, and the material intensity. You lead with a graphic that models the total replacement capital expenditure saved over a 60-year horizon. You contrast nuclear's 40 to 100-year longevity against solar's 20 to 30-year lifespan.
That reframes it immediately. It repositions nuclear as a superior long-term infrastructure play, one that's insulated from that constant capex cycle of material inputs.
It becomes an investment in resilience, not just generation.
That is a powerful shift. It turns a technical metric into a decisive economic and, frankly, geopolitical one. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about the key assumptions.
Sure.
The thesis requires 18 gigawatts of annual new builds. It assumes a sustained uranium market deficit through the 2030s.
And it leans very heavily on the accelerated deployment of small modular reactors, or SMRs, picking up space from 2035 onwards.
And this leads right into the second major area for critique, doesn't it?
It does. The core investment thesis would be, I think, significantly more robust if the analysis rigorously stress-tested these interconnected assumptions.
Through what? Modeled counter scenarios?
Exactly.
The weakness here feels pretty clear. The report identifies the key bottlenecks, the geopolitical supply risk in uranium, the dependence on HALEU.
But it presents the growth targets as a kind of narrative projection, rather than a modeled outcome that's sensitive to those specific points of failure.
Right. It assumes the 18-gigawatt target, which itself assumes massive policy translation in the US and China.
And the financial hood, that uranium market deficit, it assumes supply declines while demand keeps growing. So we have to ask the question.
What if policy delays happen? What if that 18-gigawatt target slips to, say, 10 gigawatts for a few years?
Precisely. Does the deficit still materialize? Or does the delay in new capacity actually alleviate pressure on the front-end fuel cycle, which in turn would erode the whole bullish uranium price thesis?
That's a crucial linkage that feels like it's missing. The analysis needs to move from just predicting the future to actually quantifying that downside risk.
Yes. The suggestion is to create two distinct, high-impact counter-scenarios that link that policy execution risk directly to the fuel cycle sensitivity.
Tying the policy timeline directly to the forecast gigawatt capacity.
And let's focus on the most specific technology risk here, which is HALEU.
High-assay, low-enriched uranium. The fuel needed for most of these advanced SMRs.
And the report notes that virtually all commercial-scale HALEU production is currently non-domestic. It's outside the U.S.
So that's the choke point.
It's a huge one. We need to model a delayed policy scenario where, for example, the U.S. HLU availability program fails to achieve domestic commercial scale by 2030.
And then quantify that. What specific percentage of that projected 2040 capacity growth, the 683 gigawatts, is directly jeopardized by that single point of failure?
You've got it. If SMRs really start accelerating in 2035 and those advanced reactors require HLU, then policy isn't just a driver of capacity. It's a necessary condition.
I get the importance of HLU, I do. But isn't regulatory red tape and local opposition still a much bigger, more, generalized risk than this very specific technical challenge of fuel enrichment? Focusing only on HLU might distract from the permitting nightmare?
That's where the scenario modeling provides its value, though. HALU is the quantifiable single point of failure within the technical stack. We can model its failure precisely.
So give me a concrete example of what that model would look like in the report.
You dedicate a section to it. Scenario analysis. HLU failure impact. You show the reader a graph where the total gigawatt projection drops, say from 683 gigawatts down to 550, if that HLU bottleneck persists past 2035.
And then you connect that back to the uranium market.
Then you show how that revised capacity figure impacts the longevity and the depth of the uranium supply deficit projection. It helps professional investors understand the downside risks tied to specific, monitorable government program execution. That's highly actionable.
It definitely moves the report from a narrative toward intelligence that's tied to specific program milestones. And that transitions us perfectly into the other fragile points that were identified.
The concentrated geopolitical risk in uranium supply, the HALEU bottleneck we just discussed.
And the long-term challenge of waste management.
Right. And this is where the third critique comes in for me. While the analyst does a good job identifying these fragilities, they also mention mitigating solutions that, they feel structurally minimized.
What do you mean by that?
The analysis should elevate the discussion of innovative applications, things like SMR siting and alternative fuels. They should be positioned not as these ancillary, pay attention to metrics, but as active structural solutions to the thesis's biggest fragilities.
So you're talking about how SMRs can be sited on retired coal plant sites or co-sited with data centers, and the discussion on thorium as an alternative fuel.
Precisely. The weakness is that the report treats these factors as things investors should just pay attention to, regardless of outcome.
That phrasing does kind of minimize their immediate strategic importance.
It does. I mean, look, when 2/3 of the world's uranium supply comes from just 3 countries, Kazakhstan, Canada, and Australia, diversification and political de-risking are not some long-term options. They are immediate necessities.
So, if the long-term waste disposal issue is, as the report says, the most complex part of the cycle,
Then the ability of SMRs to fundamentally shrink the emergency planning zone, the EPZ, from 20,000 acres down to just 50, that has to be a primary talking point.
because that change mitigates political and regulatory risk immediately.
Exactly. The suggestion is to structurally integrate these innovations right into the fragility discussion itself. SMRs dramatically reduce land requirements, 35 acres for the plant, another 50 for safety. That makes public opinion and regulatory siting much, much easier.
Which directly mitigates the policy execution risk we identified earlier. It could actually accelerate that 18 gigawatt annual new build target.
It's a core accelerant.
Okay, but what about thorium? I get the idea of putting that right after the geopolitical risk section. But isn't that analysis, maybe 10 years too early for most investment horizons? How do you make strategic fuel diversification actionable today?
You have to acknowledge the technology is currently sidelined, of course, but its inclusion now is a necessary geopolitical hedge.
So you're saying the analysis needs to explicitly model the timeline.
A timeline where thorium technology, which currently requires conversion to a fissile material, moves from being an alternative interest to a strategic necessity if those supply interruptions from, say, Kazakhstan actually occur. Given the concentration risk, we should be analyzing its strategic necessity now.
Okay, so let's walk through some concrete examples for this strategic integration. How would you restructure it?
You would restructure the siting and land use economics section. Instead of presenting the small footprint as just a general advantage, you link it directly to the problem. The ability of SMRs to use retired coal sites is the solution to the biggest non-technical hurdle, which is securing new land and community support.
So it's presented as a core accelerant of that 18 gigawatt target.
Yes. And as for the diversification part,
With thorium.
for thorium, you introduce it immediately after the fuel supply concentration risk section. For example, the analyst could analyze which publicly traded companies are uniquely positioned to benefit from a renewed focus on thorium R&D.
Even if commercialization is a decade away.
Even then, simply as a strategic hedge against geopolitical uncertainty. That makes the diversification idea actionable today by focusing on R&D equity exposure, rather than waiting for a full operational supply chain.
So the overall feedback then, it's really focused on maximizing the immediate impact and the defensibility of the thesis. It's about tightening those causal relationships and proactively addressing risks with the mitigating solutions that are already in the material?
That is absolutely the goal. The analyst has done the deep dive work. The facts are there. Now we just need to optimize the logical flow and the sharpness of the investment conclusion.
Make sure the report is robust, logical, and considers all the relevant contexts.
Precisely.
Perfect. So, to recap the main actionable opportunities for the analyst here. First, revise that competitive framing.
Emphasize nuclear superiority in material scarcity, ERLI, and supply chain resilience, rather than leading only with the high capacity factor.
Which fundamentally repositions the entire investment thesis.
Second, the key assumptions, particularly policy commitment and SMR acceleration, they have to be stress-tested through specific scenario analysis.
Right. Mathematically modeling how delays in, say, HALEU production would erode those long-term gigawatt targets and directly impact the uranium price sensitivity model.
And finally, we recommend structurally elevating the mitigating factors.
Things like SMR co-siting with data centers and the strategic potential of thorium.
You position them as active, immediate solutions to the current political and geopolitical fragilities, not just as some secondary benefits to keep an eye on.
The analysis presents a really robust growth thesis.
It does, but the investment payoff relies heavily on navigating those critical infrastructure and regulatory sensitivities. The report will be vastly improved by modeling that navigation explicitly.
Agreed. These targeted adjustments will maximize the report's utility and its impact for professional investors. We look forward to seeing the refined analysis. Please submit your work back to us when you're ready for the next level of critique.
That's how we approach research internally. Filter first, then analyze, and only then decide what's worth sharing. If you find this useful, feel free to follow the channel. I'll see you in the next episode.